Yes.
Then I'll begin. Okay, so this is from Mark 6. It was a dark, stormy night. The wind whistled through the grass as the 6 men walked up the mountainside. The wind whipped through the trees as they clapped their hands, and they finally got on top of the ridge. For one man, he'd been away from home for 2 months, and it had been a long time, and he was glad to be back home. The crowds had liked him, and there'd been miracles, and it had been amazing, but he was home. He'd raised a girl from the dead, and he'd restored her to embrace her parents. That he wanted, all he wanted, was to embrace his mother again. And as he looked forward, he could see the small village in front of him, his home where he'd lived for 28 years. Those white, walled houses with candles flickering in the windows, and then above them, the mountains against the starlit sky. And it was a good feeling. And he got over the ridge, and in the bowl where his village was built, he was sheltered from the wind, and he felt sheltered there in his heart. He felt he was home. So he sort of quickened his pace to get on. He passed the well in his village. And he remembered as he'd got water from there with his brothers and sisters and sort of put it on his head and then staggered up the path. And he looked at the bucket and was glad to see that the repairs he'd made to the bucket were still there. He was still holding. And there was his carpentry workshop where him and his father had worked, and he poked his head in and sniffed the sawdust. And he remembered making chairs and tables for the village and slotting them in just right, sanding them down so the kids wouldn't get hurt. And as he looked out over the village, he felt pride over the roofs that he'd mended and the doors that he'd made, and kind of missed being part of the community. And there finally was his home in front of him. And as he went up in the night, he could see the flickering candles and the 5 men standing awkwardly outside. And then his mum burst out the door, "Mary!" And he ran to her and she hugged him. He smelled her hair, and it was so good to be back. And he could see his sisters, and they crowded round, their faces wide, and they sent somebody to get his brother who still lived in the village, and his brother came. Oh, it was good to be back. And as they went into the house and they sat down and they shared stories of how the sisters, maybe one of them got married, and what had happened to the brothers, and he shared of how he left and what he'd been doing and how he went to the Gentiles, the non-Jews, the enemy of his brothers and sisters. Something changed, and as he spoke about the words that he'd said and the miracles he'd done, they thought in their hearts, "Who is this Jesus? He's our brother. We knew him when he was growing up, but who is he now?" And as he lay down to bed at the end of the night, it creaked, and the repairs had not been done well, and he wished he'd been there to do it properly. He felt like he let his parents down a little bit. And his mum sat on the side of the bed as night fell. And she whispered to him so as not to wake the other people who were sleeping there, and the animals, the sheep and the dogs. She whispered how she felt when he left, how she missed him, and how she wished he was home. And with that in his mind, he went to sleep. And he got up the next day, bright and early, and walked up the mountainside to the top of the mountain, where he remembered, past the vineyards, past the sheep and the goats, past the seeds scattered on the path, in the rocks by the weeds, until he finally, 2 more, got to the top, and he could breathe there and see out over his childhood. He could see Mount Carmel in the distance, and he remembered his parents speaking to him about the battle that took there, about how Elijah, the Jew, fought the enemies of Israel, and God sent lightning from heaven to burn up the sacrifices. And he looked to the southeast, and he saw the plain of Esdraelon and the battles that had happened there of Barak and Gideon and all those things that had taken place. And he remembered how his parents had spoken to him about how the Jews had beaten their enemies over this landscape. And he took all this to God in prayer, and he knelt before his father, and he spoke of, should he really stay here? Should he commit to this Jewish vision? Or should he go wider? Should he turn to his mother, or should he leave? When he rose, his heart was at peace. His heart was at peace, and he set off down the mountainside towards the synagogue. You could see villagers streaming to it, and as he walked in, he sniffed the dust. He remembered the lessons about God that he'd learned. And then he took the scroll of Isaiah and started to read it. And then he put it down and prepared to speak. He looked around at the people and he wondered, would they reject him? Would they accept him? And as he spoke, they started to whisper, wow, this is Jesus. Where did he get such wisdom? Where did these miracles come from? How did he get all this? This is amazing. We could use this. We could use this in this place. If people came to hear Jesus, this place wouldn't be a forgotten little village. It would be a famous town. We could use him if he stays here. We could use this Jesus. But then Jesus spoke again. And this time he spoke of a calling. He was a prophet. And he called people not just to this little village, this little community, but to go out into the city, into the outside, to leave. Pull people from a narrow thing to something that would demand their all. He spoke of broken-hearted people that needed binding up. He spoke of prisoners that needed reaching. He spoke of the Gentiles, the non-Jews, the enemies that he wanted them to go to. He gave them a vision that would demand everything they had. He gave them something that would be worth dying for. He said, now, you can step from here and you can stay here. Or you can step from here into something that will last 2,000 years and end up here. Some of the people, their eyes opened and they began to think, and their hearts thought about this. And they wondered if this village was all they were living for, and if there was more. And some of the people, their eyes closed and their hearts darkened, and they began to mutter. The crowd was on a knife edge, until one wizened finger pointed. Him? Him? This Jesus? He's a carpenter. He's supposed to mend our houses, mend our roofs and mend our doors, and he leaves us. He leaves the community behind. He's forgotten about us. Him, a carpenter? He's supposed to care for Mary and his sisters. They can't even get married, they're dishonoured, while he goes gallivanting around the countryside, healing people and speaking of crazy things. Him, a carpenter. He was supposed to take on his father's trade. His father's dead, and he's supposed to carry it on, and he's just gone.